So apparently we're trying to go live. We are live. There we go. Now this morning, we are on our last week of our transformation series, week 9. And this morning I am going to be speaking on the topic of being countercultural. Countercultural. And before I get going here, I want to ask a question. How many of you have been out for a hike and you've ended up on some really difficult terrain that was hard to walk on, or really got you winded, or really wore you out, or actually was even perhaps dangerous? Anybody? Okay. Kids here, this question's for the kids. How many of you have been out for a walk with your parents and they decided to go on a really, really tough path, and it made you so tired and all you wanted to do was just go home and lay down on the couch? Anybody here? Oh, I see some of the older kids too are feeling that. So, okay. Well, as you're thinking about the answers and about that picture, I want to tell you a story. And this is a true story. For our 20th wedding anniversary, Mark and I decided that we were going to go to Hawaii. We had never been to Hawaii. We'd heard about it. We decided to go to an island called Maui. And on the island, we had a great time. I mean, there were so many God things that happened to us in that trip. It was just like one blessing after another, after another. I loved all of it, except one thing. There was one part of our trip that was really not fun at all, and it actually was our own fault. We had rented snorkel gear on the island, and while we were at the dive shop, we got talking to the guy who owned the dive shop, and we started asking him, like, what things should we do while we're here on this island? And one of the things we had planned to do was do the drive called the Road to Hana, which is a very, very popular drive. And so we said, we're going to do that. And he said, oh, really? He said, well, and before I tell you about that, the drive to Hana is 52 miles. I'm speaking American here because it is an American island, okay? It's 52 miles, and it's quite, how would you say, windy? In fact, it has 620 bends in the road, and most of them are hairpin turns, which is where you go one direction and you come completely back the other direction. 620 turns on this road. Now, if you even are slightly prone to motion sickness, this drive will actually be a big challenge. So, of course, I took gravel. So we told this owner of the shop that we were going to do the Road to Hana. And he said, oh, well, when you do the Road to Hana, don't do the drive back the same way. Continue around the road, around the island, around the biggest mountain on the island called Haleakala. Okay? Now, Haleakala is actually a big volcanic island. The volcano is dormant, but it is huge. And he said, so rather than coming back the way you went, continue through. And we said, well, actually, our car rental agreement says we're not supposed to take that road. And he says, well, what kind of car did you rent? And we said, well, we have a Jeep. He says, oh, you can do it in a Jeep. You just probably don't want to do it in another car. Although my wife has a Corolla and I do it all the time in my wife's Corolla. This is where the narrator comes into the story and goes, he did not do it all the time in his wife's Corolla. There's no way, right? But anyway, so the next morning we got up really, really early, 5:30 in the morning on our holidays, and we started on the Road to Hana. And the Road to Hana drive is gorgeous. I mean, you pass waterfalls, you pass bamboo forests, you pass all this lush, like hibiscus growing wild in massive, massive quantities. You see the ocean, there's a black rock beach, there's all these little trendy places along the way you can stop and actually get your bearings again. It is a gorgeous, gorgeous drive. It's also very, very, very slow because of all these turns. And so, as we're going, we're just like, oh, look how beautiful. Oh, look how beautiful. And then we got to Hana, and what a letdown. I mean, there was really nothing there. It wasn't even particularly nice looking. And we thought, oh, it's the road to Hana that's the big deal, not the actual arrival. But we knew that just past Hana, there was a red sand beach. Now, at this point in time, we had not decided whether we're taking the road back again or whether we're going to continue around. And so we got to this, we said, well, we're at least going to go to the red sand beach. Well, I mean, I'm so glad we went to the red sand beach because it was gorgeous. I have never seen red sand like this. It was like we were just standing in awe. And of course, there were some local surfers there, and we got talking to them, and they said, oh, by the way, if you're already this far, what you should do is just continue a few more miles down the road, and there's another huge waterfall that almost nobody ever gets to see. And we said, oh, okay. So we continued down the road. Again, we're heading around the back of the mountain at this point. And we're looking for this waterfall and looking for this waterfall, and we're trying to find it and trying to find it, and we're not finding it, and we're continuing, and we're not seeing the waterfall. You know where this is going, right? So the whole time we're checking our map and we're seeing where we are along the way, and it's all of a sudden we're realizing, you know what, we're pretty far actually past Hana already. And the map isn't that far to get around the mountain and come back. Otherwise, we have to go back all the way through Hana and through those 620 turns, and then get back to where we were on the west side of the island. And so we thought, well, we've come all this way. The road is a little bumpy here, but it's fine. We've got the Jeep. And this looks a lot shorter and more direct. So we kept going. And there are a few bumpy spots, not so bad. There are a few twists and turns. You know what? I didn't see those on the map, actually. I didn't see those twists and turns on the map. And then we started to drive up the mountain. And as we're going up, I was thinking, I think we should turn back. And Mark said, I think we should turn back too, but I don't see any place where we can turn around right now. And we're going up, and we're going up. And the road starts to get narrower and bumpier, and narrower and bumpier, and up and up and up. And then suddenly we looked and there were no more guardrails. And the road is getting more and more treacherous. And then the next thing we know, we're going around these blind turns where there's just a big rock. And at this point, the road is about, I'm going to say, I'll be generous when I say a lane and a half wide. It's not 2 lanes. It's just over 1, actually. And we're going around these blind turns. And so Mark is hitting the horn because if somebody's coming the other way, there's no way we're going to both make it. And so he's hitting the horn, and we're going around blind turn after blind turn after blind turn. And I am white knuckling it and praying like crazy. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, this can't get any worse. Yes, it actually can get worse, because the next turn we came around a corner and there was a transport truck coming the other way. Yeah. Oh, it was a gravel truck? Yeah, but a full size. So we're standing there, we're sitting there, and we're looking at this truck, and he stopped. So I don't know if he heard us with the horn thing happening. We were probably like, oh no, not another one of them. And so he puts his arm out the window and he waves us forward. And I'm like, well, what is he going to do? Like, just throw us off the cliff? Because there's really no place to go. But what we couldn't see was there was a very, very wide indentation in the rock right at that spot. And so Mark said, okay, fold in your mirror. And he folded in his mirror. And we got past him with just inches on each side. And then we started to breathe again. And then we continued. And it just was constant. We kept going around these blind turns and around these bends, and there's the cliff, which is 100 feet or more down to the rocks below, and there's no guardrails, and we're thinking, what did we do? We continued for hours over broken and mangled, where there was pavement, there wasn't in most places, giant potholes. And we just kept praying that the road wouldn't suddenly fall away. It was terrible. Now, I just want to say at this point, yes, we should have listened to the car rental company. No, we should not have listened to Mr. Dive Shop Guy. And yes, I have 100% repented. In fact, I repented immediately way back there for not listening, okay? It was not a good idea. It was not right. I do not recommend this. But you know, there are certain parts of that journey that help me understand our journey a little bit more. For one thing, it's how easy it is for our judgment to lapse when we are tired from the journey. It's really easy. And how easy it is to get distracted and wind up on the wrong road. And how subtly you can think that your view of the road is actually accurate. And how easily we get lured by the thought of a shortcut or a shorter journey or an easier road that could actually potentially be deadly. You know, when Jesus talked about finding the narrow gate and then the wide gate, it wasn't just that one was harder to find than the other one. He wasn't just talking about like this one's obvious and this one's not. A narrow gate isn't just not easy to find, it's also not easy to pass through. You can't drive through the narrow gate. You can't even take a lot of baggage with you through the narrow gate. You might not even be able to get a backpack and you through the narrow gate. And then when you get through, you end up on a narrow path, one that's not always easy to walk, or especially fun, or maybe even safe. It doesn't naturally appeal to us. You see, the Christian life is not intended to be an interesting and scenic drive. It's not intended to be that. It's not intended to be a shortcut. Life on this earth is hard. And ultimately, the wide road that looks easier at the beginning and looks like a better journey becomes the treacherous road. Jesus knew all of this. He knew that life would not be easy, whether we followed him or not. But he knew that the narrow road is the right one. It is the one that brings life. He said, "See, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world." That's John 16:33. Take heart, I've overcome the world. You know, we've been through a lot of trouble and a number of dramatic upheavals in this last very short season. I mean, we've had a pandemic. There's been racial outrage. There's been political polarization. There's been many traumatic world events, and it's affected all of us, and it's dramatically shifted our culture. You know, society as a whole is becoming more isolated and more self-protective and more angry and more hostile than ever. And those seem like obvious wide road things, don't they? But I wonder if perhaps the underlying subtle cultural shifts affect us more than anything. You know, I don't think we would intentionally choose to take the wide road, but I think when we are weary from the journey and perhaps wishing for a shortcut, we can inadvertently wind up on the wrong road. It's easy to be distracted by a beautiful sand beach or a stunning waterfall. It's easy to be pulled by what looks to be a shortcut or a hard road. It's easy to make a poor decision when you're tired and don't want to continue on. Maybe for us, our wide road is the subtle ways we detach from one another. You know, we do that to protect ourselves. We do that when we're hurt. We do that when we're afraid. We do that when we don't feel like we have a choice. Maybe our wide road is the underlying irritation that we carry from changes that we never asked for. Maybe that's our wide road. Maybe it's the nagging fears that we don't speak out loud. Maybe it's the constant pull to distract ourselves with this thing or that thing. And Jesus said, only a few find that narrow road. Because the narrow road is hidden. The narrow road is countercultural. And we won't just stumble on it. We won't just coast onto it with the rest of society. It takes searching and digging and persevering to find that road. And it takes the right shoes to walk on it. You know, Ephesians 6 talks about our feet being fitted with the gospel of peace, right? It takes letting go of all the stuff that we hang on to, that we would want to take down that road with us. It takes intentionally choosing the narrow road. We see that same concept in the parable of the wise and the foolish builders, right? The one that we watched this morning. The wise builder built on the rock, the foolish one on sand. You know, think about that for a second. I've never built a house. I've never built anything that had a foundation. But one way or another, you got to dig down if you're building a structure. Which one is easier to dig into? The sand or the rock? You have to go into the ground. The sand is the wide road. It's the convenient road. It's the path of least resistance, right? But if you want to put a foundation into a rock, it's going to be hard. It will be hard. We have to drill down. It's slow and painstaking work. And our culture promotes what's easy and convenient and efficient. But if we are going to live as followers of Jesus, that's not how it will be for us. The gate will be small and hidden. The road will be narrow. The rock will be hard. That's not a popular message anywhere, is it? And Jesus knew that. That's why he went on to warn about false prophets. Because sometimes there's a temptation to change our message to make it a little bit more palatable. And it's really important to understand what Jesus is describing in that passage as false. Because there are a lot of heresy hunters out there. Have you heard of all the heresy hunters? Oh, this person's false, that person's false. And they're all like, basically they're the doctrine police out there, right? And what Jesus describes as false actually doesn't seem to line up with very many of those things. So we have to pay attention to what Jesus says is false. He says, outwardly, those who are false look authentic, but they're wolves dressed in sheep's clothing. They use the right words. They perform the dramatic signs. They are doing all the stuff except for the one thing that Jesus says matters, and that is doing the will of God. That's such a countercultural way to live, right? Doing God's will instead of my own will. And this is the entire war that's on humanity. Is it my will or is it yours, God? The narrow road is choosing God's will and living God's will instead of our own. And there was only one person who did that perfectly, right? Jesus. Jesus said, not my will, Lord, but yours. And that was how he lived his whole life. He didn't just do that in Gethsemane. He did it his whole life. Not my will, but yours. Our culture says this: accomplish stuff, make progress, be successful. And all of those are just screaming, my will, my will. All of those are the wide road, and all of them are house built on sand. But Jesus says, be like me. Be like me. Set aside your own will. Do the will of the Father. Isn't it interesting how Jesus said in that passage, I never knew you? He was saying, I don't recognize you. Because what Jesus recognizes is his own work in our lives. Himself manifest in our lives. And when he's manifest in our lives, we are seeking to do the will of the Father. That's what he recognizes. Those who know God and love him obey his commands. And so God is calling us as his people to live that countercultural lifestyle. He's saying, lay down your will to take up the will of God. It won't be easy, but you know what? Strangely, the more you come to accept that the journey is hard, the lighter it becomes. It's so strange, but it's true. When you can accept that the journey is hard, there's a grace that gets released into our lives to walk it. And as we walk that road, that's where the abundant life comes. That's the road to joy. That is the road to real peace. That's the road to real freedom. This is the road to becoming like Jesus. This is the road to being transformed into the image of Christ. And so laying down our own wills is a daily dying. It's a daily setting aside our will to take up God's will. We don't have to have it figured out, how am I going to do this for the next 50 years? We just have to do it today. And then in the next today. And then in the next today. And God gives us grace for that. That's what he means when he says, take up your cross every day and follow me. And God will use our surrendered lives to bring his kingdom. He will use a people who live a countercultural lifestyle to bring about kingdom transformation. He will. He will. He says he will do it. Right now, we're living in a world that is fearful. People are very afraid. We need to live with an extravagant love that drives out that kind of fear. God's love that drives out that kind of fear. Right now, the world is bitter and angry. And we need to live kind and compassionate and deeply forgiving. Right now, the world is independent and rebellious. And we need to be humble and accountable and honoring of one another. Right now, the world is grabbing at everything it can, and we have to live extravagantly generously. Right now, the world is hungry for power, and we have to choose weakness so that he can be strong in us. Right now, the world is filled with do your own thing, and we need to be committed to do God's thing. Right now, the whole world is building on sand, and it will fall. It will fall. But we desperately need to build on the rock that is Jesus. That's what he's calling us to. In his teachings, Jesus often warned the disciples about falling away. He knew a lot of people are going to fall away for one reason or another. He knew that as the days went on, it would become increasingly difficult to stay the course. He knew that. But he wants to pour out a grace on his people so that we are empowered to do the will of God. So that we are empowered to be fully surrendered to him. So that we are empowered to live a countercultural life. And so this morning I want to ask the Holy Spirit to show us, Lord, what road am I on right now? Are there places, God, where I have stepped through the wrong gate? Are there places where I somehow ended up on the wrong road? Are there places my life needs to come back in line with the will of God? Holy Spirit, will you show us those places and give us grace to step back onto that narrow road? You know, sometimes sermons end with an altar call, and that's always good. If you haven't given your life to Jesus and you want to this morning, I want to invite you to come up to the front after we're done here, and we're going to pray. None of this like every head bowed and eyes closed. You gotta be bold. You're going to need that to walk in Him. So, but also I want to call people who, if you feel like God is pricking your heart this morning, that you really do need to be fully surrendered to Him. Come on up too. We're going to keep social distance, but I really feel like we have got to declare with our bodies what's happening in the spirit sometimes, right? We have to declare with our actions what's happening there. We don't need to be afraid. God is calling us to a deeper devotion. He's calling us because He wants to see His kingdom come in and through our lives. He wants all of us. And I believe as that happens, we will see Him move in ways we could only ever have imagined. It's a lot, but don't be afraid. He will give us everything we need to do it. He's faithful. He's faithful. He's faithful. We're going to spend some time in worship. Just let the Holy Spirit, let Him do the transforming work. Let Him do what He wants to do. Amen.